The farmer's dollar is heavy, and the clerk's is light and nimble. Leaps out of his pocket, jumps onto a card, and faro tables. But still more curious is its susceptibility to metaphysical changes. It is the finest barometer of social storms. It announces revolutions. Every step of civil advancement makes every man's dollar worth more. In California, the country where it grew, what would it buy? A few years ago, a few years since, it would buy a shanty, dysentery, hunger, bad company, and crime. There are wide countries like Siberia where it would buy little else today than some petty mitigation of suffering. In Rome, it will buy beauty and magnificence. 40 years ago, a dollar would not buy much in Boston. Now it will buy a great deal more in our old towns, thanks to railroads, telegraphs, steamers, and the contemporaneous growth of New York and the whole country. Yet, there are many goods appertaining to a capital city which are not yet purchasable here. No, not with a mountain of dollars. A dollar in Florida is not worth a dollar in Massachusetts. A dollar is not value, but representative of value, and at last, of moral values. A dollar is rated for the corn it will buy, or to speak strictly, not for the corn or house room, but for Athenian corn and Roman house room, for the wit, probity, and power which we eat bread and dwell in houses to share and exert. Wealth is mental. Wealth is moral. The value of a dollar is to buy just things. A dollar goes on increasing in value with all the genius and all the virtue of the world. A dollar in a university is worth more than a dollar in a jail. In a temperate, schooled, law-abiding community, than in some sink of crime where dice, knives, and arsenic are in constant play. The banknote detector is a useful publication, but the current dollar, silver or paper, is itself the detector of the right and wrong where it circulates. It is not instantly enhanced. Is it not instantly enhanced by the increase of equity? If a trader refuses to sell his vote, or adheres to some odious right, he makes so much more equity in Massachusetts, and every acre in the state is worth more in the hour of his action. If you take out of State Street the 10 honestest merchants and put in 10 roguish persons controlling the same amount of capital, the rates of insurance will indicate it. The soundness of banks will show it. The highways will be less secure. The schools will feel it. The children will bring home their little dose of the poison. The judge will sit less firmly on the bench, and his decisions be less upright. He has lost so much support and constraint, which all need, and the pulpit will betray it in a laxer rule of life. An apple tree, if you take out every day for a number of days a load of loam and put in a load of sand about its roots, will find it out. An apple tree is a stupid kind of creature, but if this treatment be pursued for a short time, I think it would begin to mistrust something. And if you should take out of the powerful class engaged in trade 100 good men, and put in 100 bad, or what is just the same thing, introduce a demoralizing institution, would not the dollar, which is not much stupider than an apple tree, presently find it out? The value of a dollar is social, as it is created by society. Every man who removes into this city with any purchasable talent or skill in him gives to every man's labor in the city a new worth. If a talent is anywhere born into the world, the community of nations is enriched, and much more with a new degree of probity. The expense of crime, one of the principal charges of every nation, is so far stopped. In Europe, crime is observed to increase or abate the price of bread. If the Rothschilds at Paris do not accept bills, the people at Manchester, at Paisley, at Birmingham are forced into the highway, and landlords are shot down in Ireland. The police records attest it. The vibrations are presently felt in New York, New Orleans, and Chicago. Not much otherwise, the economical power touches the masses through the political lords. Rothschild refuses the Russian loan, and there is peace, and the harvests are saved. He takes it, and there is war, and agitation through a large portion of mankind, with every hideous result ending in revolution and a new order. Wealth brings with it its own checks and balances. The basis of political economy is non-interference. The only safe rule is found in the self-adjusting meter of demand and supply. Do not legislate, meddle, and you snap the sinews with your sumptuary laws. Give no bounties, make equal laws, secure life and property, and you need not give alms. Open the doors of opportunity to talent and virtue, and they will do themselves justice, and property will not be bad, and property will not be in bad hands. In a free and just commonwealth, property rushes from the idle and imbecile to the industrious. Brave and persevering. The laws of nature play through trade, as a toy battery exhibits the effects of electricity. The level of the sea is not more surely kept than is the equilibrium of value in society by the demand and supply. And artifice or legislation punishes itself by reactions, gluts, and bankruptcies. The sublime laws play indifferently through atoms and galaxies. Whoever knows what happens in the getting and spending of a loaf of bread and a pint of beer, that no wishing will change the rigorous limits of pints and penny loaves, that for all that is consumed so much less remains in the basket and pot. But what is gone out of these is not wasted, but well spent, if it nourish his body and enable him to finish his task. Knows all of political economy that the budgets of empires can teach him. The interest of petty economy is this symbolization of the great economy. The way in which a house and a private man's methods tally with the solar system and the laws of give and take throughout nature, and however wary we are of the falsehoods and petty tricks which we suicidally play off on each other, every man has a certain satisfaction whenever his dealing touches on the inevitable facts, when he sees that things themselves dictate the price, as they always tend to do, and in large manufactures are seen to do. Your paper is not fine or coarse enough, is too heavy or too thin. The manufacturer says he will furnish you with just that thickness or thinness you want. The pattern is quite indifferent to him. Here is his schedule and variety of paper, as cheaper or dearer with the prices annexed. A pound of paper costs so much, and you may have it made up in any pattern you fancy. There is in all our dealings a self-regulation that supersedes chaffering. You will rent a house, but must have it cheap. The owner can reduce the rent, but so he incapacitates himself from making proper repairs, and the tenant gets not the house he would have, but a worse one. Besides that, a relation, a little injurious, is established between landlord and tenant. You dismiss your laborer, saying, "Patrick, I shall send for you as soon as I cannot do without you." Patrick goes off contented, for he knows that the weeds will grow with the potatoes, the vines must be planted next week, and however unwilling you may be, the cantaloupes, crooknecks, and cucumbers will send for him. Who but must wish that all labor and value should stand on the same simple and surly market? If it is the best of its kind, it will. We must have joiner, locksmith, planter, priest, poet, doctor, cook, weaver, ostler, each in turn through the year. If a St. Michael's pear sells for a shilling, it costs a shilling to raise it. If in Boston the best securities offer 12% for money, they have just 6% of insecurity. You may not see that the fine pear costs you a shilling, but it costs the community so much. The shilling represents the number of enemies the pear has, and the amount of risk in ripening it. The price of coal shows the narrowness of the coal field, and a compulsory confinement of the miners to a certain district. All salaries are reckoned on contingent as well as on actual services. If the wind were always southwest by west, said the skipper, women might take ships to sea. One might say that all things are of one price, that nothing is cheap or dear, and that the apparent disparities that strike us are only a shopman's trick of concealing the damage in your bargain. A youth coming into the city from his native New Hampshire farm, with its hard fare still fresh in his remembrance, boards at a first-class hotel and believes he must somehow have outwitted Dr. Franklin and Amalthus, for luxuries are cheap. But he pays for the one convenience of a better dinner by the loss of some of the richest social and educational advantages. He has lost what guards, what incentives. He will perhaps find by and by that he left the muses at the door of the hotel and found the furies inside. Monies often cost too much, and power and pleasure are not cheap. The ancient poet said, "The gods sell all things at a fair price." There's an example of the compensations in the commercial history of this country. When the European wars threw the carrying trade of the world from 1800 to 1812 into American bottoms, a seizure was now and then made of an American ship. Of course, the loss was serious to the owner, but the country was indemnified. For we charged 3 pence a pound for carrying cotton, 6 pence for tobacco, and so on, which paid for the risk and loss, and brought into the country an immense prosperity, early marriages, private wealth, the building of cities and of states. And after the war was over, we received compensation over and above by treaty for all the seizures. Well, the Americans grew rich and great. But the payday comes round. Britain, France, and Germany, which our extraordinary prophets had impoverished, send out, attracted by the fame of our advantages, first their thousands, then their millions of poor people to share the crop. At first we employ them and increase our prosperity, but in the artificial system of society and of protected labor, which we also have adopted and enlarged, there come presently checks and stoppages. Then we refuse to employ these poor men, but they will not be so answered. They go into the poor rates, and though we refuse wages, we must now pay the same amount in the form of taxes. Again, it turns out that the largest proportion of crimes are committed by foreigners. The cost of the crime and the expense of courts and of prisons we must bear, and the standing army of preventive police we must pay. The cost of education of the posterity of this great colony I will not compute, but the gross amount of these costs will begin to pay back what we thought was a net gain from our transatlantic customers of 1800. It is vain to refuse this payment. We cannot get rid of these people, and we cannot get rid of their will to be supported. That has become an inevitable element of our politics, and for their votes, each of the dominant parties courts and assists them to get it executed. Moreover, we have to pay not what would have contented them at home, but what they have learned to think necessary here, so that opinion, fancy, and all manner of moral considerations complicate the problem. There are a few measures of economy which will bear to be named without disgust, for the subject is tender, and we may easily have too much of it, and therein resembles the hideous animalcules of which our bodies are built up, which offensive in the particular, yet compose valuable and effective masses. Our nature and genius force us to respect ends, whilst we use means. We must use the means, and yet in our most accurate using somehow screen and cloak them, as we can only give them any beauty by a reflection of the glory of the end. That is the good head, which serves the end and commands the means. The rabble are corrupted by their means. The means are too strong for them, and they desert their end. The first of these measures is that each man's expense must proceed from his character. As long as your genius buys, the investment is safe, though you spend like a monarch. Nature arms each man with some faculty which enables him to do easily some feat impossible to any other, and thus makes him necessary to society. This native determination guides his labor and his spending. He wants an equipment of means and tools proper to his talent, and to save on this point, or to neutralize the special strength and helpfulness of each mind. Do your work, respecting the excellence of the work, and not its acceptableness. This is so much economy that, rightly read, it is the sum of economy. Profligacy consists not in spending years of time or chests of money, but in spending them off the line of your career. The crime which bankrupts men and states is job work, declining from your main design to serve a turn here or there. Nothing is beneath you if it is in the direction of your life. Nothing is great or desirable if it is off from that. I think we are entitled here to draw a straight line and say that society can never prosper, but must always be bankrupt until every man does that which he was created to do. Spend for your expense, and retrench the expense which is not yours. Alston the painter was wont to say that he built a plain house and filled it with plain furniture, because he would hold out no bribe to any to visit him who had not similar tastes to his own. We are sympathetic, and like children, want everything we see. But it is a large stride to independence when a man, in the discovery of his proper talent, has sunk the necessity for false expenses. As the betrothed maiden by one secure affection is relieved from a system of slaveries, the daily inculcated necessity of pleasing all, so the man who has found what he can do can spend on that and leave all other spending. Montaigne said, when he was a younger brother, he went brave in dress and equipage, but afterward his chateau and farms might answer for him. Let a man who belongs to the class of nobles, those namely who have found out that they can do something, relieve himself of all vague squandering on objects not his. Let the realist not mind appearances. Let him delegate to others the costly courtesies and decorations of social life. The virtues are economists, but some of the vices are also. Thus, next to humility, I have noticed that pride is a pretty good husband. A good pride is, as I reckon it, worth from 500 to 1,500 a year. Pride is handsome, economical. Pride eradicates so many vices, letting none subsist but itself, that it seems as if it were a great gain to exchange vanity for pride. Pride can go without domestics, without fine clothes, can live in a house with 2 rooms, can eat potato, purslane beans, lied corn, can work on the soil, can travel afoot, can talk with poor men or sit silent, well contented in fine saloons. But vanity costs money, labor, horses, men, women, health, and peace, and is still nothing at last, a long way leading nowhere. Only one drawback. Proud people are intolerably selfish, and the vain are gentle and giving. Art is a jealous mistress, and if a man have a genius for painting, poetry, music, architecture, or philosophy, he makes a bad husband and an ill provider, and should be wise in season, and not fetter himself with duties which will embitter his days and spoil him for his proper work. We had in this region 20 years ago, among our educated men, a sort of Arcadian fanaticism, a passionate desire to go upon the land and unite farming to intellectual pursuits. Many effected their purpose and made the experiment, and some became downright plowmen. But all were cured of their faith that scholarship and practical farming, I mean with one's own hands, could be united. With brow bent, the firm intent, the pale scholar leaves his desk to draw a freer breath and get a juster statement of his thought in the garden walk. He stoops to pull up a purslane or a dock that is choking the young corn, and finds there are 2. Close behind the last is a 3rd. He reaches out his hand to a 4th. Behind that are 4,001. He is heated and untuned, and by wakes up from his idiot dream of chickweed and red root to remember his morning thought, and to find that with his adamantine purpose he has been duped by a dandelion. A garden is like those pernicious machineries we read of every month in the newspaper, which catch a man's coat skirt or his hand and draw in his arm, his leg, and his whole body to irresistible destruction. An evil hour he pulled down his wall and added a field to his homestead. No land is bad, but land is worse. If a man own land, the land owns him. Now let him leave home if he dare. Every tree and graft, every hill of melons, row of corn, or quickest hedge, all he has done, and all he means to do, stand in his way like duns, when he would go out of his gate. The devotion to these vines and trees he finds poisonous. Long free walks, a circuit of miles, free his brain and serve his body. Long marches are no hardship to him. He believes he composes easily on the hills. But this pottering in a few square yards of garden is dispiriting and driveling. The smell of the plants has drugged him and robbed him of energy. He finds a catalepsy in his bones. He grows peevish and poor-spirited. The genius of reading and of gardening are antagonistic, like resinous and vitreous electricity. One is concentrated in sparks and shocks. The other is diffuse strength, so that each disqualifies its workman for the other's duties. An engraver whose hands must be of an exquisite delicacy of stroke should not lay stone walls. Sir David Brewster gives exact instructions for microscopic observation. Lie down on your back and hold the single lens and object over your eye, etc., etc. How much more the seeker of abstract truth, who needs periods of isolation and rapt concentration and almost a going out of the body to think. Two, spend your genius, and by system. Nature goes by rule, not by sallies and saltations. There must be system in the economies. Saving and unexpensiveness will not keep the most pathetic family from ruin, nor will bigger incomes make free spending safe. The secret of success lies never in the amount of money, but in the relation of income to outgo. As, after expense has been fixed at a certain point, then new and steady rills of income, though never so small, being added, wealth begins. But in ordinary, as means increase, spending increases faster, so that large incomes, in England and elsewhere, are found not to help matters. The eating quality of debt does not relax its veracity. When the cholera is in the potato, what is the use of planting larger crops? In England, the richest country in the universe, I was assured by shrewd observers that great lords and ladies had no more guineas to give away than other people, that liberality with money is as rare and as immediately famous a virtue as it is here. Want is a growing giant whom the coat of have was never large enough to cover. I remember in Warwickshire to have been shown a fair manor, still in the same name as in Shakespeare's time. The rent roll, I was told, is some £14,000 a year. But when the second son of the late proprietor was born, the father was perplexed how to provide for him. The eldest son must inherit the manor. What to do with this supernumerary? He was advised to breed him for the church and to settle him in the rectorship which was in the gift of the family, which was done. It is a general rule in that country that bigger incomes do not help anybody. It is commonly observed that a sudden wealth, like a prize drawn in a lottery, or a large bequest to a poor family does not permanently enrich. They have served no apprenticeship to wealth, and with the rapid wealth come rapid claims which they do not know how to deny, and the treasure is quickly dissipated. A system must be in every economy, or the best single expedients are of no avail. A farm is a good thing when it begins and ends with itself, and does not need a salary or a shop to eke it out. Thus, the cattle are a main link in the chain ring. If the nonconformist or aesthetic farmer leaves out the cattle and does not also leave out the want which the cattle must supply, he must fill the gap by begging or stealing. When men now alive were born, the farm yielded everything that was consumed on it. The farm yielded no money, and the farmer got on without. If he fell sick, his neighbors came into his aid. Each gave a day's work, or a half day, or lent his yoke of oxen, or his horse, and kept his work even, hoed his potatoes, mowed his hay, reaped his rye, well knowing that no man could afford to hire labor without selling his land. In autumn, a farmer could sell an ox or a hog and get a little money to pay taxes withal. Now the farmer buys almost all he consumes: tinware, cloth, sugar, tea, coffee, fish, coal, railroad tickets, and newspapers. A master in each art is required, because the practice is never with still or dead subjects. Master in each art is required, because the practice is never with still or dead subjects, but they change in your hands. You think farm buildings and broad acres a solid property, but its value is flowing like water. It requires as much watching as if you were decanting wine from a cask. The farmer knows what to do with it, stops every leak, turns all the streamlets into one reservoir, and decants wine. But a blunderhead comes out of Cornhill, tries his hand, and it all leaks away. So is it with granite streets or timbered townships as with fruit or flowers. Nor is any investment so permanent that it can be allowed to remain without incessant watching. As the history of each attempt to lock up an inheritance through 2 generations for an unborn inheritor may show. When Mr. Cockaigne takes a cottage to the country and will keep his cow, he thinks a cow is a creature that is fed on hay and gives a pail of milk twice a day. But the cow that he buys gives milk for 3 months. Then her bag dries up. What to do with a dry cow? Who will buy her? Perhaps he bought also a yoke of oxen to do his work. But they get blown and lame. What to do with blown and lame oxen? The farmer fats his after the spring work is done and kills them in the fall. But how can Cockaigne, who has no pastures and leaves his cottage daily in the cars at business hours, be pothered with fatting and killing oxen? He plants trees, but there must be crops to keep the trees in plowed land. What shall be the crops? He will have nothing to do with trees, but will have grass. After a year or 2, the grass must be turned up and plowed. Now what crops? Credulous Cockaigne. 3. Help comes in the custom of the country, and the rule of impera parendo. The rule is not to dictate nor to insist on carrying out each of your schemes by ignorant willfulness, but to learn practically the secret spoken from all nature, that things themselves refuse to be mismanaged, and will show to the watchful their own law. Nobody need stir hand or foot. The custom of the country will do it all. I know not how to build or to plant, neither how to buy wood, nor what to do with the house lot, the field, or the wood lot when bought. Never fear, it is all settled how it shall be, long beforehand, in the custom of the country. Whether to sand or whether to clay it, whether to plough, and how to dress, whether to grass or to corn, and you cannot help or hinder it. Nature has her own best mode of doing each thing, and she has somewhere told it plainly, if we will keep our eyes and ears open. If not, she will not be slow in undeceiving us when we prefer our own way to hers. How often we must remember the art of the surgeon, which, in replacing the broken bone, contents itself with releasing the parts from false position. They fly into place by the action of the muscles. On this art of nature, all our arts rely. But the two eminent engineers in the recent construction of railways in England, Mr. Brunel, went straight from terminus to terminus, through mountains, over streams, crossing highways, cutting ducal estates in two, and shooting through this man's cellar and that man's attic window, and so arriving at his end, at great pleasure to geometers, but with cost to his company. Mr. Stevenson, on the contrary, believing that the river knows the way, followed his valley as implicitly as our Western Railroad follows the Western River, and turned out to be the safest and cheapest engineer. We say the cows laid out Boston. Well, there are worse surveyors. Every pedestrian in our pastures has frequent occasion to thank the cows for cutting the best path through the thicket and over the hills, and travelers and Indians know the value of a buffalo trail, which is sure to be the easiest possible pass through the ridge. When a citizen fresh from Dock Square or Milk Street comes out and buys land in the country, his first thought is to a fine outlook from his windows. His library must command a western view, a sunset every day, bathing the shoulder of blue hills, Wachusett, and the peaks of Monadnock and Uncanoonock. What 30 acres and all this magnificence for $1,500? It would be cheap at $50,000. He proceeds at once, his eyes dim with tears of joy, to fix the spot for his cornerstone. But the man who is to level the ground thinks it will take many hundred loads of gravel and fill the hollow to the road. The stonemason who should build the well thinks he shall have to dig 40 feet. The baker doubts he shall never like to drive up to the door. The practical neighbor cavils at the position of the barn. And the citizen comes to know that his predecessor, the farmer, built the house in the right spot for the sun and wind, the spring and water drainage, and the convenience to the pasture. The garden, the field, and the road. So, Dock Square yields the point, and things have their own way. Use has made the farmer wise, and the foolish citizen learns to take his counsel. From step to step, he comes at last to surrender at discretion. The farmer affects to take his orders, but the citizen says, "You may ask me as often as you will, and in what ingenious forms, for an opinion concerning the mode of building my wall, or sinking my well, or laying out my acre, but the ball will rebound to you. These are matters on which I neither know nor need to know anything. These are questions which you and not I shall answer." Not less within doors a system settles itself, paramount and tyrannical, over master and mistress, servant and child, cousin and acquaintance. It is in vain that genius or virtue or energy or character strive and cry against it. This is fate, and it is very well that the poor husband reads in a book of a new way of living and resolves to adopt it at home. Let him go home and try it, if he dare. Another point of economy is to look for seed for the same kind as you sow. Look for seed as of the same kind as you sow, and not to hope to buy one kind with another kind. Friendship buys friendship, justice, justice, military merit, military success. Good husbandry finds wife, children, and household. The good merchant, large gains, ships, stocks, and money. The good poet, fame and literary credit. But not either the other. Yet there is commonly a confusion of expectations on these points. Hotspur lives for the moment, praises himself for it, and despises Furlong, but he does not. Hotspur, of course, is poor, and Furlong a good provider. The odd circumstance is that Hotspur thinks it a superiority in himself, this improvidence, which ought to be rewarded with Furlong's lands. I have not at all completed my design, but we must not leave the topic without casting one glance into the interior recesses. It is a doctrine of philosophy that man is a being of degrees, that there is nothing in the world which is not repeated in his body being a sort of miniature summary of the world, then that there is nothing in his body which is not repeated as in a celestial sphere in his mind. Then there is nothing in his brain which is not repeated in a higher sphere in his moral system. Five. Now these things are so in nature, all things ascend, and the royal rule of economy is that it should ascend also. Or, whatever we do, must also have a higher aim. Thus it is a maxim that money is another kind of blood, pecunia alter sanguis, or the estate of man is only a larger kind of body, and admits a regimen analogous to his bodily circulations. So there is no maxim of the merchant which does not admit or of an extended sense, e.g., the best use of money is to pay debts, every business by itself, best time is present time, the right investment is in tools of your trade, and the like. The counting room, maxims liberally expounded, are laws of the universe. The merchant's economy is a coarse symbol of the soul's economy. It is to spend for power and not for pleasure. It is to invest income, that is to say, to take out particulars into generals, days into integral eras, literary, emotive, practical of its life, and still to ascend in its investment. The merchant has but one rule: absorb and invest. He is to be capitalist. These scraps and filings must be gathered back into the crucible. The gas and smoke must be burned, and earnings must not go to increase expense, but to capital again. Well, the man must be capitalist. Will he spend his income, or will he invest? His body and every organ is under the same law. His body is a jar in which the liquor of life is stored. Will he spend for pleasure? The way to ruin is short and facile. Will he not spend but hoard for power? It passes through these sacred fermentations by that law of nature whereby everything climbs to higher platforms, and bodily vigor becomes mental and moral vigor. The bread he eats is first strength and animal spirits. It becomes in higher laboratories imagery and thought, and still higher results courage and endurance. This is the right compound interest. This is capital doubled, quadrupled, centupled, man raised to his highest power. The true thrift is always to spend on the higher plane, to invest and invest with keener avarice, that he may spend in spiritual creation and not in augmenting animal existence. Nor is the man enriched in repeating the old experiments of animal sensation, nor, unless through new powers and ascending pleasures, he knows himself by the actual experience of higher good to be already on the way to the highest. That is the end of wealth. Next is culture, which is 42 to 60, 18 pages long. I already read Society and Solitude. I already read Farming. Then comes his book of poems. And after that, which I will probably skip, although I don't hate his poetry. After that, starts writing about people. Ezra Ripley. Emerson's step-grandfather, Dr. Ripley. Then Emancipation in the British West Indies. Then the Fugitive Slave Law, the Emancipation Proclamation, Thoreau, Abraham Lincoln, Carlyle.